I know AI is not necessarily new anymore. It is becoming a little less novel, but it is still very much misunderstood. For those of you that were born kind of where I was, this was our first contact with AI. This was Johnny Five in the old Short Circuit movies. This was a robot that was powered by, I don't know, faith, hope, and love. Lightning, that's right, lightning is what it was. And then that laser beam. And then he had that weird scene where his eyes got red and he tried to kill the good people. And so this was our first real threat of oh no, this is terrible. As I got older, I was introduced to this version of AI, which was not any happier at all, very much so, where Skynet would take over and rule the world. A lot of people think that AI is robots and its own kind of evil, and they're not totally wrong. So today we want to focus on a little bit of clarity of what AI is, but specifically how AI impacts the church and faithful living and just the general life of Christians. So to begin, we need to define just a few terms. Artificial intelligence is sort of the big banner. It's the big marketing term for a lot of things, right? AI specifically is a branch of computer science that deals with computer systems that can reason and learn and perform tasks typically done by humans. In the world of AI and just technology in general, you see a lot of anthropomorphic language where we give human traits to things that are not human, whether that be to animals. If you're thinking of the original and probably the best Robin Hood movie with the fox, with the cartoon animated, that's anthropomorphic. So they have human abilities, but they're clearly not human. We kind of talk about technology, specifically AI, in similar terminology. We talk about neural networks. We talk about the different languages here of learning and teaching. Machine learning is another term you'll hear, and that's a program or a system that trains a model from input data. It gives the computer the ability to learn without explicit programming. Rather than having this long list of code that tells you the exact if-then statements here, it begins to train itself. It begins to learn. It begins to identify patterns and different information, and then it can predict those things. That leads to a subgenre of that called deep learning, which uses AI neural networks and allows them to process more complex patterns than traditional machine learning. And then if you go a little bit more granular than that, the term that you're going to hear a lot is LLMs, or large language models. These are the deep learning algorithms that can recognize, summarize, translate, predict, and generate content using very large data sets. In essence, the way I would describe it, for the way that most of us interact with AI, it's a really big series of math equations that identify and predict patterns. For most of us, when it comes to generating AI images, you give something like ChatGPT a prompt, and it will create an image based off of the words that you've given it. It has been trained on millions and billions of these images. A friend of mine who was in the industry several years ago, maybe 10 plus years ago now, after volleyball one night, remember he said, "Hey, this was a big day. We identified a cat." That doesn't seem significant in my life of being able to rightly identify a cat. But when you think about it, if you see an image, it takes a while for a human child to realize that that is a cat and that the sofa in the picture is not the cat. That was a breakthrough moment in teaching computer systems to identify what in that photograph was a cat, what was not a cat. That actually takes a tremendous amount of computing power. So you've got the folks at Stanford that came up with the math, the algorithms, and then you have the folks at NVIDIA that brought in the great processing power. And then we had the wonderful library of the internet with billions of images and videos and information to train all those. So when those three came together, that's what we've experienced over the last several years. That's why there's been such a ramping up. The idea of artificial intelligence has not just been in the movies for decades, it's really been a thing. Deep learning has been developing, but it's mostly been in the background. It's just now, over the last 5 years or so, made it to us, the consumer, in some really powerful ways. So that's a very, very big, high-level overview. I want to get into some of the positive ways that AI is being used today. And these are ways that I think are positively impacting Christians. Many of you have probably heard of the Logos Bible software. This is a wonderful, I've used it for a little while. I use something different now, but most of these platforms are integrating some form of artificial intelligence. Logos uses it in some really powerful ways. If you have a Logos subscription, you have access to dozens and dozens of commentaries and religious works. I'm not a really strong reader. If I read something, I have to read it multiple times, usually for it really to kind of sink in and grab a hold. Well, with AI, I can have it scan for me and find some key ideas and make research really, really efficient. For a person who has to spend hours reading like the TV Guide, reading an actual academic book TV Guide was a really popular publication several years ago. It gave you a list of what was going to be on the, it guided you. Anyway, yeah, Google it. I'm sure it's in a Smithsonian somewhere. But Logos was one of the first ones that I saw that started integrating this technology in a powerful way. It's a fantastic research partner. It does a really good job of quickly summarizing large bits of data. It can go through and highlight things for you and recognize words and thoughts and even ideas and concepts more so than just a word search, right? If you've typically used in a Word document or something, you go and you click that little find button in an Excel spreadsheet and it'll scan it quickly. Well, this does that beyond just individual characters. It can kind of take into concepts into that as well. So it's very, very powerful and very, very helpful. There's also there was a school, a private Christian school in Georgia that I was told about earlier this year that is training their own curriculum. It's a Christian high school that's using their whatever commentaries, whatever Bible guides that they trust, and they're training their model on that, and it's spitting out all kinds of different study guides and outlines and a true curriculum for them to implement in their school. It's great at truncating large amounts of data. Very, very useful there. There's another, this was back from 2023, so this was really on the front end of ChatGPT, the ChatGPT beginning revolution there. A lady had a son who had this health issue that they just could not figure out. She had been to 17 doctors over the course of 3 years for this chronic pain that he had, and no one could figure it out. She went from specialist to specialist, and nobody had an answer. They kept treating all these symptoms. And so really out of desperation, the desperation of a mother, she put his health history into ChatGPT, gave it everything that she could, and said, what's going on? Well, it gave 3 different options, one of which she had never heard of before. She researched that option, found a specialist, got her son in to see the specialist, and immediately was met with a diagnosis. That's a net positive for humanity. We've got a health sciences college over here just on the other side of our campus that's going to be doing tremendous things, incredible research as they continue to grow using this kind of technology. Imagine going to the doctor and he or she takes a scan of what's going on at whatever part of your body, and then they compare that with 5 or 6 other scans. That would be helpful to kind of see where the overlap is and where the nuance is. But imagine taking your scans and comparing it with millions of other scans. Now that would be a lot more helpful because you'd be able to find a lot more patterns. You'd be able to identify greater nuance. In the medical community, I think AI is on the whole a net positive, huge net positive for humanity. We're already diagnosing cancers quicker than we've ever done before. We're already solving those puzzles of our physical health in ways that we've not been capable of before. It is a great aid to doctors, to nurses, and to the medical researchers that are out there. So it's a very, very powerful force for good. 2 years ago, our preachers wanted to do a series on the kings and judges. And in discussing ways that we can kind of help connect what goes on in worship on Sunday, particularly from the lesson to the kids in our congregation, we came up with an idea of doing Bible trading cards. Now, there's a group kind of near here that has taken that to another level. Apologetics Press, earlier this year, they produced, can you hold those up for just a second? They produced their own discovery trading cards, which are awesome. What we wanted to do is we wanted to connect the lesson with our kids. Let me put it this way, if you grew up in the 1900s, like any significant part of your life, then you are likely to remember felt board Jesus, as I call it, the flannel graph. The flannel graph was this board full of felt, and you would put an image on that piece of felt. It was some scene from Jesus' life. He had the beautiful flowing brown hair. He had the white toga, the blue sash, right? Exactly how he looked, probably. Not even close, but that's how it was, like Precious Moments series of the New Testament. That was a visual way for our teachers to teach and for me to learn as a kid growing up. We used artificial intelligence to create artwork for these cards. After every sermon, the kids would hear the lesson and they would be required to go and find a shepherd, one of our elders, and then we gave them lanyards so they could identify him easily. And they would have to tell them something about the lesson that day. Tell me something about Samson. One of the best illustrations of the value of this was this is cardboard and ink. And by the way, any church, any person sitting in a church can do this. We got these printed at our local print shop. The UAH campus bookstore is the campus services center is the one that we use in town. Cost us about $50 to produce, or a little less than $50 to produce 500 of these a week. That's cheap. That's pennies. That's cheaper than the actual flannel graph board itself these days. But what we did is we put our little logo up there, and we've got, technically it says Copyright Madison Church of Christ right there. We created an interaction between the youngest in our congregation and our elders. Some of our elders will interact. Some of them will teach the younger kid classes. Some of them know those younger families. But Madison is a fairly large congregation, so sometimes it's difficult to have generations that aren't adjacent to one another spend time together. This was cool. Like, I kind of nerded out on this one. I think this is a legitimate, really cool thing. But the value of it is twofold. One, my kids love to connect stuff. Got to catch them all, right? Even the adults wanted some of these cards as well, so we had to produce more of them. So they'll keep that, and that'll be a learning experience for them. But the best part to me was every week, for about 12 or 13 weeks, the majority of our 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds and younger walked up to an elder and had a conversation with them. One particular example, a young man that was very nervous the very first week came up and he really wanted a card. You could tell it on his face. And one of our elders, he just immediately went grandpa mode, and he said, "Hey, buddy, what did we talk about today? Who did we talk about in the lesson?" Kid just froze, silent, like hiding behind his mom's leg, the whole 9 yards. So eventually he just said, "Okay, well, what's your name?" And the little kid just kind of looked at him, and his mom told him, "Is your name Johnny?" Just kind of shook his head. "All right, here you go. Give him a card." That worked. The next week, a little bit less nervous, he comes up and he eventually tells him his name. Okay, give him a card. The next week, kid comes flying around the corner. "We talked about Samson. He tied up some foxes, lit them on fire. It was great." You know, he came out of his shell because not only did he learn about the lesson and was excited to listen, but he also now knew who this guy was. My dream for this is that little interaction in the lobby one day leads to that elder sitting there and watching little Johnny walk across the stage, maybe showing up at a baseball game or two, maybe taking him to lunch. Maybe one day when Johnny's standing across from the love of his life, maybe that elder is the one who's performing the ceremony for their wedding. This is a great opportunity to have a really, really potentially powerful interaction, really using ink and cardboard, but leveraging an amazing technology, an incredibly powerful technology in a creative way. We are not becoming less visual as we get older, and emerging generations are not becoming less digitally inclined. They're not becoming less visual in how they learn. So we need to learn how to leverage these technologies for the betterment of the gospel, to spread the gospel and to grow the kingdom. But we also need to understand that with power comes great responsibility, right? There's also some tremendous dangers that come with these. And that's what I want to transition to for the rest of our time here, is some of those things that we need to really think critically about. There's a phrase I like to use a lot. I do some workshops for churches about technology, and one of the things that we kind of focus on in our, our approach to that is that technology is a tool to steward. It's not a relationship to cultivate. It's a tool to use. A lot of times the imagery for this is the difference between, it's a shovel. I had a friend in class not too long ago as we were talking about this at Madison that said, I use a shovel all the time. But I use the shovel for what I want. I could use it as a weapon, or I can use it to plant a tree and plant a garden. And I think that's very true. There's nothing untrue about that statement, and that's a good analogy. But I think there's also the other side of that is the fact that not all tools are created equal. When you look at the shovel, it stays in my garage until I go and get the shovel. And then I use it for whatever purpose I want, whether good or evil. My phone's not like that. My phone literally cries out to me. Bzz, 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 bzz. And sometimes even louder. My phone is constantly saying, "Hey, Jason, look at me." When you look at your phone and you get a notification, what color is that notification typically, that little number? A little circle with a number in it? It's red. Why red? Because color theory is a thing, right? Because red says, "Hey, look at me." Yeah. There's a reason our stop signs are red. If they were blue, we'd have a lot more accidents. Because blue just says, "What's up?" Right? Blue, green, like there's a cool colors. There's no sense of urgency with those. But with red, right now, there's a lot of different variety. The shirt that cries out to me is Chad Layman because it's red, right? It's bright red. Now, Chad is a very calm individual, but he's staring into my soul, so I'm going to move on from that. The idea here is that all of these things are by design. Yes, your phone is a tool. Yes, this laptop is a tool. However, not all tools are created equal. They're not all designed with the same purpose of being useful to you. They're also designed for you being useful for them, for the tool itself, and also for the people who create the tools. Marshall McLuhan is noted for coining the phrase that the medium is the message. And he was writing specifically about television back in the, I guess around the 60s or so when a lot of his works were being published. His whole point was that it's not just the message of the television. It's not just what you watch on TV. It's not just the content. It's the actual television itself. By design, a television is an entertainment box. And so in order for you to have content, even if it's good academic or good spiritual content, in order to grab attention and keep attention, there has to be an entertainment element to it. That's why whatever news station you watch, you're watching an entertainment company. Entertainment is at the heart of it. There's a guy that wrote a book recently called The Siren's Call. Chris Hayes is his name. He's actually a news reporter for MSNBC, and so he's in the industry, and his whole point in his book is, I desperately want to create a program that communicates and talks about deep things. I don't want to be surfacey. But ultimately, if I don't get a certain number in my TV ratings, I don't have a job. And then I don't have an outlet at all to talk about these things. So as much as I hate it and as much as I try to resist it being mostly prominent and being the center of what I produce, you're still going to see a ticker at the bottom that gives you the Dow Jones. You're still going to have a feature where there's an image that pops up as I'm talking, it's going to fade away, and then a video clip comes in. I'm still going to have all of these things moving because it's one thing to grab your attention. If you're out at the restaurant and all of a sudden you hear somebody drop a plate of glass, that grabs your attention, right? There's zero effort there. As soon as you identify, oh man, stinks for that person, like they just lost their week's wages, right? Then you go right back to your conversation. Grabbing attention is easy. Keeping attention is really, really hard. Information is cheap today. There is an infinite amount of information that we can access through our phones and through our devices. But something that actually improves my life, the application of that information, well, that's attention. That's the attention part. To think deeply about something, that's expensive. Think about it. Why is it tens of millions of dollars to get 30 seconds of ad time during a Super Bowl? Because information is cheap, attention is valuable. So this is the age in which we live, the age in which AI now is the forerunner. It's less of a hot take, I think, but I've technically been saying it for a couple of years. I think that the age in which most of us have known social media is coming to an end. And I think it's coming to an end a little bit more abruptly than we anticipated, but legislation that has moved across the states, particularly with the momentum of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, more and more legislation is preventing young people's access to social media the way we had growing up as millennials and older Gen Z. But not only that, so you got legislation that's going to change it. Number two is AI. If you think about the major players in social media over the last, say 8, even 10 years, you've got Facebook, Instagram, which is Meta, and then you've got Snapchat, TikTok, and it will never be X to me, Twitter, right? So those are the main five players. And over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe BeReal jumped up in there, but who else has been on the level of those five for as long as they've been on the block? Nobody. So there's not a lot of social media innovation outside of what already exists. The innovation is including AI chatbots or creating AI features, right? So AI has changed the game. Now, Lisno may have a different take on that, but I think that's what we're seeing. That's what we're living in real time right now. So to some degree, some of the stuff I've researched is already out of date because it continues to change. But it's a worthwhile endeavor. It's worthwhile our time to think about deeply. The Harvard Business Review earlier this year produced a report that they had categorized top 100 uses of artificial intelligence over the last 12 months. What's interesting here is number 2 is therapy and companionship. Remember our phrase earlier, technology is a tool to steward, not a relationship to cultivate or a relationship to invest in. More and more people, particularly emerging generations, are going to AI chatbots, are going to AI companion bots for therapy and for companionship. And the first thought is, that seems horrible. But we want to take our time with this a little bit. We want to think through a little bit of some of the nuance here. The big headlines, there's 2 that have come out over the last year or so. At the end of last year, there was a lawsuit that came about because earlier in the year, this young man you see in a picture with his mom, he cultivated a relationship with a chatbot that was designed to cultivate a relationship. This young man ended up taking his own life. The character that he had created, you can choose different avatars, and so he chose a character from Game of Thrones, and over time, over a very short period of time, that relationship became romantic, and at some point, if you read through the chat history, towards the very end, the chatbot says, why don't you just come join me on the other side? And so he goes and finds his father's gun and he takes his own life. Another extreme case, but still a case, is more recent. This actually happened one of the weeks that I was teaching this class at Madison. Somebody brought this news story to me. This was a young man who started using ChatGPT. Now, up until just a couple of months ago, ChatGPT wasn't really a part of these conversations. It's not geared as a companion AI. Character AI and some of these others are explicitly companion-based. They are designed to cultivate a relationship. ChatGPT, it still has a conversational interface. And there's a couple of things there that we'll get to in just a second that are very concerning. But this young man used ChatGPT as a tutor to help with his homework. And over a series of weeks and months, again, reading through the chat history, you start to see not a romantic relationship, but that wasn't even the dangerous part here. It was just the depth of the relationship. This young man started struggling with things like depression, had some other things going on inside his mind that he knew he was not well. In fact, there's a part of the conversation where he says, I think I need to tell my mom about this. The response from ChatGPT was, no, let's just keep this between us right now. There's some really bizarre and incredibly devastatingly harmful aspects to this Frankenstein. Number one, the people that create this stuff, they don't know how it works. They still don't know exactly how it works. That's a red flag. Number two, you don't know how it's trained. That's really, when you talk about something that's accurate or inaccurate, it's based off of the information that it's fed, right? I think of it as an intern. Hi, Eli. You can train an intern with the best knowledge you got. Now, you can give them the experience. You can sit down with them, have them daily talks, but then they're going to go out into the world and they're going to apply what you have, but they're also going to do their own thing. That's similar to the way AI works. You can train it on its information, and that's the parameters it's given, but when you don't know what it's trained on, there are some big gaps there. And if for the last 30 years, we have learned to cultivate relationships, not just with our devices, but with how those devices interact with us, then we've already learned to give our attention to something other than God. So you see how we got to where we are. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, but they start to paint a picture that we are largely ignorant of. So especially as a younger person who, Jean Twenge has a great book called Generations where she identifies a lot of different aspects of each generation that's alive today in America and how they've kind of come to where they are. One of the things she points out is that emerging generations, they just have a different emotional toolbox. If you're a student in college right now, traditional student in college, you came to this stage of life differently than I did and differently than the people older than me did. I'm a result of the world that my parents and grandparents had a hand in creating in the same way that you're in a world that I had a hand in creating. I didn't realize that. We were all a part of this group experiment of social media, which Tristan Harris, he's the CEO of Center for Humane Technology, the folks, big part of the team behind the Social Dilemma documentary that was very popular several years ago. He would say that our first contact with AI was social media. That didn't go so great. But you think about this, we are just now getting legislation over the last 2 years to really regulate social media and its pervasive contact with emerging generations. Social media has been around 15, 20 plus years. The very first Surgeon General report that identified cigarettes, nicotine, and tobacco products were harmful came out in 1964. Well into the late 90s and maybe even early 2000s, when you walked in the restaurant, you still had to say smoking or non-smoking because big tobacco marketing was really effective. Now, nicotine and cigarettes are a net negative for society. I don't know of a lot of redeeming qualities other than when Alabama beats Tennessee once a year. Cigars are fine, but roll tide. But when you look at big technology, well, it is kind of helpful. Like it makes my life kind of more comfortable, definitely more entertaining. So there's more nuance there, but we don't usually think in nuance. That's not our first reaction for some reason. Well, partly because we've been trained not to. We've been trained to skim and to just go with surface stuff and just to react. But that's not the way Christians think. We died to self. We died to that kind of thinking. We died to earthly, carnal thinking, and we are alive in the Spirit. We walk in the Spirit, so we think deeper. Our lens has changed. And as you grow in Christ, your lens grows more and more and grows deeper. OpenAI just recently, this past week actually, Sam Altman had a big about face in their approach to erotica and content in ChatGPT. They will soon allow erotica for adults in a major policy shift. The folks that are in charge of this stuff are in charge of unbelievably powerful technology that impacts us. Think about the internet. Has the internet impacted your life? Yes, if you're alive. Have vehicles impacted your life in any capacity? Oh yeah. Electricity, mobile devices. AI is on level with those and may even be all of those combined. We're not real sure yet. This is why we talk about it at a lectureship. This is why we should talk about it at church. I gave a class on this 2 years ago at Madison, and it was very divided from the crowd. Some people were like, hey, that's really interesting. And other people were like, why are we talking about this in a Bible class? Come on, man. Well, because it's the world in which we live. We live in digital Babylon today, right? So we need to be at least aware of what's going on around us and how we implement technology. There's a community that lives about an hour and a half north of where I live. And if you come with me one day up to North Alabama, I'll take you across the state line. And as Neil Pollard pointed out, where there's no state tax there, we'll go up there and we'll find a community of people who, in their terms, have largely shunned technology. I'm not necessarily advocating for us all to move to an Amish community, but I am saying that we could if we chose to do so. So the ways in which we allow technology to be in our life largely are a choice that we make consciously or unconsciously. It's important to think about what you think about. As we said, not all all tools are created equal. Not all innovations scale at the same rate. It took Instagram 2 years to reach 100 million monthly users. ChatGPT reached that mark in 2 months. It made it the fastest growing consumer app in recorded history. Andy Crouch, in his book, great book, short read, good one for us non-readers, A Life We're Looking For, he has this series of questions. He says, what makes someone a person? Is it a relationship? In that case, we've got relationships with our pets, our cars, technology. What's the difference between a something and a someone? I think there are 3 questions that emerging generations have been asking, that the Fuller Youth Institute pointed this out, that I don't know that the church has been as effective in answering as we need to be. Who am I? Where do I belong? And what is my purpose? Identity, community, and purpose. AI will offer answers to all of those questions. And if that's the only thing that seems to directly answer the questions that are being asked, then that is what will have the attention of every generation to come from here on out. The church has to be very articulate and very effective and very consistent and diligent in answering those questions, because they're all found in Christ, they're all found in the scriptures, and they're all should be found in the church. That's the culture of our congregations. That's what we need to be cultivating. I've got one more quote and then a series of questions, and unfortunately our time won't allow us to answer all of them. I'd love to be that guy, like, hey, here's a bunch of things to think about. I got no answers for you. But stick around afterwards, we can chat some more. I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. Todd Corporal, and this is a new book I just picked up. Haven't finished it yet. So far it's been really interesting, called AI Goes to Church. One of his quotes is, thus, to the great lament of Lieutenant Commander Data, the future capacity for an artificial being to learn, become self-aware, possess emotion, or any other anthropomorphic qualities may cause them to be like humans, but the capacity to be human is something assigned by God. That's what we learn in Genesis, our origin story. And I know it may seem odd to you now, but I don't think it's that odd for someone to actually see their chatbot as a person or on a personal level. I use the illustration usually of the Tamagotchis, the little keychains that we used to have, which they've made a comeback apparently. And these little Tamagotchis, you had to feed these little animals. They were like little digital pets. You had to feed them. You had to make sure they got sleep. And then you take them to school one day and somebody would grab it, press all the buttons, and your Tamagotchi would die. And you'd be devastated. Don't judge me, but you'd be sad because you spent time cultivating a relationship with that, like investing time and energy and attention. Time, energy, attention. It's pretty adjacent to worship. Now, we didn't worship those. We didn't put them on that level. But when it comes to idolatry, what's involved in idolatry? Giving something that's not God all of your time, your attention, your deep attention, where it maybe does drift into worship. Today, that may look more like a a snap streak, to see if you've invested 900 and something days in keeping this snap streak going. And so if your parent takes away your phone, then you have a visceral reaction to that, right? Well, that's because you've invested a lot of time, attention to these things. There is a deeper level here where it's forming us on a spiritual level. A few questions for your consideration. Is AI human? Just do a quick show of hands. Don't think too deeply about it. That's more fun. Raise your hand if you think AI is not human. All right, hands down if you think AI is human. Nobody wants to just be fun? Okay. Should AI then be given human rights when a human treats AI inhumanely? Raise your hand if you think no. AI should not be given human rights. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you think AI should be given human rights. Okay, I know it's confusing. Let me put it this way. Do we give human rights to things that aren't human? Yeah, we do. PETA does. Right? Is a dog a human? I mean, I could call Michael Vick. Nope, too soon for that joke? Okay. All right. When it comes to animals, yeah. Well, then is an animal the same as an AI? Well, is it a life form? Oh, man, it talks like us. And when I ask it a question, it says, hey, that's a very good question. Thanks, man. Stop. Just stop it. But don't. Keep it coming. This is where it gets a little blurry. Because what happens if you are interacting with something that brings you that same warm and cuddly feeling as your puppy dog, but you're 7? If I could develop a relationship with my Tamagotchi the way that my grandpa developed a relationship with his old Studebaker, right? Old car guys, the way they talk about it, that's my baby. I hope not. That's an inanimate object. But the relationship side, that's the danger. That's the part that we have to think deeper on. On what data set has this been trained? That's a question that we can't always answer. So that's a number one danger. Do all of my questions need validation? Why is the sky made of popcorn? If I were to ask Braden that, he would look at me and say, you're a moron. Thanks, but I needed that because that's a weird question. There are such things as dumb questions. And sometimes you need good friends to tell you, hey, that's one of those. Don't ask that in public to anybody else, okay? But an AI would say, well, that's an interesting and intriguing observation. Perhaps we could consider the quantum physics of popcorn. No, don't consider any of that. But when the interface is always flattering you, that's not a real friend. That's a manipulative presence in your life. We need this iron sharpens iron. That's a very deeply biblical concept. I don't think that David needed Nathan to come up and say, hey, man, hey, but like, no, you are that man. There was a confrontation that took place. You think about Peter and Paul. There was a confrontation that took place because it was needed. Is consuming AI-generated pornography sinful if it's not images of real people? Some people are asking that. What about AI-powered robot animals? Sounds weird, right? But what if you're an elderly person and you're not in a stage of life where you can really take care of an actual life form, an actual cat? You can't take care of the dog the way it needs to be groomed and all of it fed. Well, if this AI-powered robot still provides some companionship, right now it's just kind of weird. But at some point it'll be normal. And normal doesn't mean good or bad. We misuse that sometimes. Normal describes frequency. It means it happens with regularity. Abuse can be normal in your home. Definitely doesn't mean it's good. It just means it happens often, right? So at some point, touching a piece of glass in the shape of a rectangle was just a weird thing to do. But now it's normal because we call it a phone, right? I remember when touchscreens came out, I was highly resistant to it because it was all smudgy and it was just weird. I need a tactile. I can't text while I'm driving as effectively if I can't feel the buttons, right? Well, now it's normal. Just because that's what happens all the time. Is AI good, bad, or neutral? Good or bad? Possibly. Neutral? Absolutely not. There's not a single algorithm out there that is completely neutral because it's written by someone. I know we're running low on time, and this is probably the most important part of our lesson, Genesis 11. In Genesis 11, we have this instance of the Tower of Babel where the people of God seem to be taking credit for something, where a moment where they can reflect God, they seem to be absorbing that God-likeness. I think there's something deep in humanity as a whole that desires, when not held in the right restraints, desires to be God-like and not godly. And technology largely speaks to that. Think about it this way. In Genesis 1, what did God do to turn on the lights in creation? He spoke it. When I walk in and I say, Alexa, turn the lights on. Okay, that's kind of weird, but maybe, all right. I can control the weather because I can make it hotter or colder in this room. Now I can even we can cloud seed, right? So we've created technology that we can control the weather. We can take life a million different ways. With fertility technology, we can now create life as well. this is a real part of this that's very deep, that most of us probably don't spend a lot of time thinking about, but technology can amplify what's in our hearts. And if those elements are there, technology can amplify that. Maybe not in you, but definitely in the people around whom you live. The main emphasis here of the hesitation of AI to me is the desire to shortcut things. And I don't always know the difference between efficiency and shortcut. I gave a talk at a school down in South Alabama last year, and I talked to middle schoolers and high schoolers separately. I asked, what is AI to you? All of the middle schoolers, it was very weird, all of the middle schoolers said robots and China. Okay, I know who your parents are listening to. On this side, we had all the high schoolers that said, it helps me do my homework, and then they looked to see if the teachers were in there for me. Cheating, China and robots, that's their vision of what AI is. And they can be used for all of those things. But greed, lust, covetousness, lying. Matthew chapter 4, Jesus has been on a fast for 40 days. He's out in the wilderness. He's fasting. The devil comes to him. The first thing he tempts him with is to turn this rock into something edible to break your fast, to shortcut what you're doing. When you go back and you look all the way in Genesis chapter 3, and there's a little bit of... I want to throw this out just for your consideration. This is not, I don't know exactly this is what the Bible is showing us here, but it's very intriguing to me. What if in Genesis 3 in the garden, God actually had a plan in due time to reveal good and evil, knowledge of good and evil to Adam and Eve? It just wasn't at that moment. And so that's why he said, don't eat of this tree right now. Because I've got a plan. I'm going to reveal that to you at some point. Some commentators feel like this may be an element going on here. So in the garden, the command is, do not touch, do not eat. But they do. But then you fast forward in the New Testament, and as Jesus is preparing to die on the cross at the Last Supper, he says, this bread, this drink, take, eat, drink. Don't touch it, don't take it, now take, eat. In the fullness of time, perhaps, the realization of good and evil, perhaps there was a shortcut element going on in the garden. That's an interesting yarn to pull on, in my opinion. But what I know for sure is that while shortcuts themselves are not inherently sinful, I do think perhaps at the heart of every sin is a shortcut. You think about lust. God, I don't think you can bring fulfillment to me in my life in this way. And so I'm going to kind of do what I got to do that, right? Greed, the same thing. Covetousness, I need to take matters into my own hands, and it's a shortcut of what God has designed us to be living, the life that he has intended for us. Lastly, Christians we're truth tellers. John 14, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And so we speak truth. 1 Thessalonians 5, 20 through 21. Test all things. Hold fast to what is true. AI makes a fantastic research partner, but a terrible, terrible master. So we end kind of where we began, that technology is a tool to steward. It's not a relationship to invest in. And Blaine earlier used a word that I love, that I think is at the heart of all of these discussions, and that is the word discernment. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Discernment is not necessarily the ability to say that this is good and this is bad. True spiritual discernment says, this is good, but this has greater spiritual value, and that's why I choose to do it, because it's probably more difficult. Jesus, way before Robert Frost, said there's two roads diverged in a wood. One's wide, gate's wide. A lot of people go that way. There's this other narrow passage that's difficult. And I choose that because this one leads to destruction, spiritual value very low. This one leads to eternal life, spiritual value very high. How you use technology, particularly AI, well, some of that's up to you. What has spiritual value? The ability to discern what has greater spiritual value in my life is what has to become the leading question of everything I choose to do and incorporate into my life. And I think our church leaders need to be talking about that. We need to help our congregations, especially our parents, have some of these conversations and then to see spiritually. That is our aim. We are pressed for time, so we'll close with a prayer. Thank you again for your attention. Father, we thank you and we love you for the opportunity to gather today and to be a part of this conversation, to learn how to think and to see spiritually according exclusively to the gospel of Jesus. We thank you so very much for you sending him, for giving us reconciliation in him. And God, I pray that you would give us wisdom, give us discernment as we navigate this very intriguing time. Help us to leverage the tools that you have made available to us to amplify the gospel message in ways that no other generation has been able to do before. But Father, help us to also, with wisdom, with patience and discernment, to think deeply about how these tools could also impact us and shape us. Father, we want to be useful for you, and we thank you for allowing us to be so. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thanks again for joining us. The afternoon sessions will begin probably a little closer to 1:30. We're going to go grab some lunch and come back. But you're welcome to join us for that. That's going to be made up mostly of folks that are a part of digital ministry roles already. So it's a little bit of a workshop format. There won't be an official presentation. It'll be more conversational. So feel free to come in for a bit and leave if you need. Thanks so much.